A former police intelligence officer says he has compelling evidence that the Yorkshire Ripper murdered more people than we think, and he killed men as well as women. Chris Clark has spent years researching unsolved murders and believes that 22 of them were committed by Peter Sutcliffe. Irene Vidler's father, Frank Craven, was beaten to death with a hammer. No one has ever been charged with the murder, but Irene and her family believe the person responsible was Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. He was well known to her family, he lived in the same streets and was often in their house. And Irene joins me on the programme tonight. Irene, thank you very much indeed for coming onto the programme tonight.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about your father. He was murdered in 1966 and would have been one of the Yorkshire Ripper's first victims. Would you tell me what happened to your dad?
Well, he went to his office as usual. He was bookmaker, and he went down on the bus, 11:25 bus, in the morning to his office. He went into his office about 11:30. My uncle went in just before 11:45 and found him dead.
And do we know any circumstances around that other than that at that precise moment?
None that I know of. I was in the Air Force at the time, so, I was away from home.
Were you actually close to your dad, although you were away from home? Was he somebody that you were quite close to?
We all loved my dad. We all loved my dad. He was my dad, and that was it.
And actually, during the research to my interview tonight, I actually saw a photograph of your dad. He looked a nice man.
He was lovely. He hadn't got a good start in life. He got TB in his bone in his hand. My grandfather refused to let it be amputated. He did have the bone taken out, but it spread to his spine, and he had a distinct kyphosis, which resulted, he was only 4'7" high, but he was a man, he had a family, 5 children, and he worked all his life.
And obviously,
provided for us.
Yeah, the love of your life as well, yes, as a young girl?
Yeah.
Now, this was in Bingley, and Peter Sutcliffe lived in the same street. Your family knew him well, didn't they? What do you remember of him back then?
I don't remember much about him, although he was 3 years younger than me. I know he went to St Joseph's Catholic School and to Cottingley Manor. He used to come to our house. My mother used to do what she called bag teas, where she put some sandwiches and a bun in a paper bag, so all the children could sit outside. And he used to come to that. My younger sister, was the one who knew him most, and apparently he was always trying to get her to go out with him. But I know one day Jenny and my dad were walking down the street to catch the bus, and Peter was behind them, mimicking my father and, making fun of him behind his back.
And that didn't please you, obviously?
No, it didn't. It's very upsetting.
Your father was killed only 4 weeks before your wedding day. I can't even imagine what that must have been and what that did to you, actually, Irene.
Well, I was going down on the train to London, and I had a half day and a week off, and my fiancé was meeting me. And I said to this colleague who was with me, this is the first time in my life that things have gone right for me. I said, I've got a week off. I'm going to plan the rest of the wedding. I've only got to go back to the Air Force for 2 weeks. We're getting married 4 weeks a day. We've got a house. I said, everything's going just right. My fiancé met me off the train. We went to the house he was renting at the time. He was working at Gatwick Airport. And to have a meal before we set off for Yorkshire. And there was a knock at the door, and the police were there. And I said, what have you been doing? Have you been speeding or something? He said, no, they won't come here for me speeding. They've got to catch you at the time. And they just said, can you phone this telephone number? There's been an accidental death. And I said, well, who? Is it my dad? And they said, we don't know. So we didn't have a phone. We had to go over and find a phone. And it was a friend of my sister. She had a phone, and she sent over for my sister to come back. And Jim was talking to Joyce, and he just said, c'est votre père. And then Anne came on the phone and she said, "Can you come home? Something awful's happened." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Somebody's been to my dad's office and killed him." And I said, "Who has?" She said, "We don't know." And at that point I just went hysterical. And I don't remember much about it, except we left the food on the table, we got in the car and we just drove home. And we found out what had happened. My grandmother said, "Well, don't cancel the wedding. Your dad wouldn't have wanted it. You don't want it." But we cancelled the reception, the cake and everything. And then my grandmother said to the relatives, "Well, you can't go to a wedding when our Freddie's just been killed." So none of the family came to the wedding. And I said, everything's gone wrong. All it needs now is for it to tip it down and Jim not turn up. Well, in the morning it was raining like mad. And anyhow, I got to the church and Jim had got there, so one thing had gone right. And then just as I started to walk down the aisle and they were playing the wedding music, this man came up to me and said, "Have you got over your dad being killed then, love?" And that just killed me, really.
Must have broken your heart, Irene, yeah? You did say a few moments ago, one of the questions you asked on the telephone was, who's killed Dad? Now, the police did have a suspect.
Yeah.
Who were they looking for?
Oh, I don't know. I never found that out. They had a photo kit and they were saying, "Does it look like so-and-so? Does it look like so-and-so?" And I said, no, I don't know. But I knew straight away how the person had got away, how they'd escaped so quickly. And my father's office was just about 10 yards from a little snicket that went down onto the canal bank. And all Sutcliffe had to do was go on the canal bank up the field to his house. Nobody would have seen anything. And I think, I'm almost positive in my mind, that's how he got away.
You did mention Sutcliffe's name there, and the young suspect was seen nearby wearing a distinctive cap. So,
yeah, Donovan hat.
Yeah. And tell us about the hat and Sutcliffe.
All I know that apparently he had a hat at the time. It was in it. He was working at the churchyard in Bingley. He got paid an extra 5 shillings for washing bodies in the mortuary, and he used to take his friends in for viewing and things. So, you know, it was, and that's really all I know about him.
Do you know if Sutcliffe was questioned?
I don't. I know his younger brother was at the time, but I don't think Peter was at that time over my dad. I know his younger brother was questioned.
How long did they investigate your dad's murder before it became listed as unsolved?
I don't really know. I don't think they didn't really put it down as unsolved, because when they caught Sutcliffe, I was immediately thought, well, that is the same way that my dad was killed. And I phoned up the police, as did my 2 sisters and my brother on separate occasions, unbeknown to each other, and said, could it be that he has killed my father?
OK, well, what we'll do, we'll just take a breath for a second, if we can here, Irene, and we'll play some music. But afterwards, I'd like to talk to you about, well, you've waited for 50 years now for justice for your dad, and what the police are saying about it right now. We'll catch up on that in a few moments' time. It's Late Night Graham Torrington. Late Night Graham Torrington here until 1 o'clock tonight, and I'm talking to Irene Vidler, whose father was murdered. She believes he was killed by Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who knew her family, and now a former police intelligence officer says he has compelling evidence that Sutcliffe did kill men as well as women. So, Irene, you were saying to me a few moments ago, when it emerged that Peter Sutcliffe was the Yorkshire Ripper, you had some reaction to that news, didn't you?
Yeah. And as I said, I phoned the police, and I said, could it be that he's killed my father? And they said, oh no, he only kills women, and that's it. And that was it. Nothing more was said. And
there were certain things about the attack on your dad that made you think Sutcliffe was the killer, weren't there?
Yeah, well, it was 1966. A murder was unusual. It was a rarity, a phenomenon. And how many people were going around at that time hitting people over heads with hammers? It was just... When my dad's funeral was, the streets were lined with people. Nowadays, a murder's a commonplace thing, but then it wasn't. And the fact that it resembled so closely how Peter Sutcliffe killed his victims put the suspicions in my mind. But then there was all this gap, 66, and then the murders of the women in Yorkshire. Because when a serial killer works, he doesn't have gaps. And then I found out that his wife was studying in London for a year, and that he'd been down there, he worked. He had a sister. He was frequently up and down motorways in the area where other people was murdered. And, and so that all this suspicion builds up and builds up.
Were you surprised by the response you got from the police?
At the time I was. It was just, nothing to do with your dad. That's it, finished. No more.
Now, of course, Peter Sutcliffe never admitted that he killed any men. That would have destroyed his defence at his trial, of course, that God was telling him to kill prostitutes. But now, that former police intelligence officer, Chris Clark, says that he's got compelling evidence that Sutcliffe killed men as well. Does that give you any new hope of getting justice?
Not at all. Our police commissioner, Burns Williamson, has set aside 1.5 plus million to investigate cold cases. And so I sent an email to him saying, does that mean that you're going to look at my father's case? At which point I got a visit from 2 police detectives who discussed it in detail and said, when the new police station in Keighley, when they moved police stations in Keighley, the evidence of my father's case had been lost. They said so there was no evidence, and my father's case was not one they were going to pursue, because even if Peter Sutcliffe admitted that he had killed my father, the prosecutors would not take the case any further because there was no evidence.
How does that make you feel?
Well, it just means I'm never going to get closure. All I really want is for Peter Sutcliffe to stand up and say, yes, I did kill my dad, I did kill your dad, and, I would know for certain, and that would be the end of it. There's not much more they can do to Sutcliffe himself. He's incarcerated for life. I don't think he should be in Broadmoor. I don't think he ever should have been. The judge at his trial said, we've only got his word that he's schizophrenic, and his wife was schizophrenic, and it was so devious he could have imitated her symptoms. They were suggesting on the radio that he'd go to Wakefield, might go to Wakefield prison, which I think will be extremely insensitive for them to put him in the place where he committed so many crimes. But for myself, I don't think I will ever get closure.
Well, we've talked to West Yorkshire Police, and they say because of this they are reviewing documents relating to the Yorkshire Ripper. And I just want to read to you the statement that they've actually given us. In this review, the interests of victims of crime and their families are of paramount importance, as is the requirement to ensure that no information is made public that could subsequently prejudice any future criminal investigation or judicial process. For this reason, we cannot comment in more detail at this stage. Let me ask you finally, Irene, what have these 5 decades of uncertainty been like for you personally?
For me personally, it's something that's never gone away. It's always there at the back of my mind. Every time a new book comes out, every time there's an article on it, everything surfaces again. And you just never forget it. It's always there. And I think my poor dad did not deserve this. Did not deserve it at all.
Irene, it's very brave of you to come onto a radio station and talk so openly tonight, and I hope that it's not opened up too many old wounds for you tonight on the programme, but you obviously speak very passionately about your dad, and there's obviously a lot of love there for your dad, who isn't with you any longer, so thank you very much indeed for doing that tonight.
My pleasure.
One more comment then on my chat with Irene, who believed that Peter Sutcliffe killed her dad. Jen Burton's been in touch. She said, I lived in Yorkshire when Fred Craven, Irene's father, was murdered. I remember his funeral, even though I was only 11 at the time. He was well known and respected, and the police should be ashamed that they lost evidence to do with his murder. Irene was so brave coming on to tell her story. You could hear that even though, after all these years, the pain that she'd carried through, it was just like yesterday.